Welcome back, listeners, to Diversion Insights. My guests today are Michael Ring and Dale Pfrimmer. Both Mike and Dale are nurses at the Mayo Clinic, and in a minute, I'll ask them to give you their background. Our topic today is Propofol. Mike and Dale are co-authors of a Propofol waste study titled Propofol as a Drug of Diversion, Changing Disposal Practices to Reduce Risk. So welcome, both of you, to the podcast. Mike, let's start with you. Tell us about your background and what your current role is.
Thank you, Terry. Well, it's an honor to be on this podcast with you. And my name is Mike Ring. I'm currently a nurse at Mayo Clinic, and I started my career over 15 years ago in cardiac surgery. So I took care of patients after heart surgery and just loved that care at the bedside. And I kind of evolved into the cardiology area where I've been the last 7 years or so, and just really enjoyed my time as a nurse, and really excited to share more about our study and the work that we did together. Dale was an incredible mentor when I was in graduate school. And so it was a wonderful project to work on with him, and to see the results that we did. Very, very exciting.
That's great. Dale?
Yes, thanks for having us on to discuss this important topic. I've been a nurse at Mayo Clinic for 31 years. I've spent a number of years on our drug diversion prevention response team, primarily focused on critical care. And when Mike was in grad school, he came looking for the project, and I thought, I have the perfect project for you. And it's been a very successful project. He chose wisely.
Interesting. All right. So I'm going to jump. That was one of my questions for the both of you. You know, Propofol is gaining momentum in the diversion scene, but yet there are some of those in OR who are surprised when I tell them that. You know, people are using it they're diverting it and they're abusing it. They can't imagine anyone abusing Propofol based on really the primary use of the medication, right? To induce unconsciousness. It's like, why would somebody do that? So I want to talk about that. But let's jump to the reason for choosing the project, because you're in interesting roles right now, currently at Mayo. And so I was going to ask, like, why did you choose this, and why the two of you? How did this come about?
I'll let Dale share more about from his perspective. I know as a graduate student, sometimes projects can be such a great impetus to have resources on time and investment in a project. And so, like Dale said, this project kind of bubbled to the surface, and it was a very impactful area that he had been working on, as he mentioned, being in the committee working with drug diversion prevention. And this really resonated with me as well. I think risk management and being able to reduce risk, protect our colleagues, and also the environmental factors that were in play here, I think all resonated with me. And I just think it was a feasible project in the timeline that we were looking at. So I think it aligned really well with our values, as well as it was a project that Dale was very passionate about. So I was able to really engage with that passion as well. So, but Dale, I'll let you share more about from your perspective.
Absolutely. At the time, I was very involved in our drug diversion response team, and we had a very proactive approach to trying to identify risk points. And in a risk assessment, Propofol was identified as a potential for abuse. And it really was work of one of our Mayo Clinic colleagues who published a study of doing a very similar project in the surgical suites with the recommendation that this be implemented in other areas. Saw her work and thought, this looks like something that we could definitely take and use to fit our clinical practices. So as Mike said, he came looking for a project. We identified this one right away, and we hit the ground running.
Great. All right. Well, it's definitely a worthy project. Do you have any statistics on the growing abuse of propofol?
We did. At the time this project was completed in 2017 into 2018 is when we actually implemented. And so in our paper, we did write, we did relate some of the current literature at that time for abuse of propofol. I think worldwide, there's a lot of global literature that was relating the incidence of abuse and just the risk that was in the literature was very vast. I think because it wasn't a controlled substance, we saw a lot of themes that emerged. So I think that was a big part of our write-up. So it wasn't any particular numbers of abuse. I think there was some documented abuse, but a lot that was unknown, I think, at that time. So so I don't have any current data on that, but
Right.
Dale, from your perspective, with the drug diversion prevention, that propofol, from your perspective, what was your impression, as we started the project?
Yeah, I think data-wise, I haven't looked at the recent data about propofol diversion or abuse, but just anecdotally, as you said, when you talk to colleagues about propofol as a drug of abuse, that people are often disbelieving or just unaware of it as a problem and a potential problem. Before we published the paper, Mike and I presented a poster at NTI, the Critical Care Nurses Conference, and we got very similar comments from a number of individuals who I wouldn't have ever thought of that. That wasn't even on my radar. We heard many similar comments to that.
Yeah. I recently, I wish I could remember the term somebody told me it's got a term. If you see any of your, I guess I think mostly of anesthesia providers, but it could be anybody that's got access to it, obviously. If they've got bruising on their face, that is your like, oh, okay, let's think about this. But in your paper, I have it up here. Just one line here. It says heavy abusers have been known to inject propofol up to 15 times a day because of its short duration. That's a lot of times a day to go missing and to put yourself at risk like that.
That was pretty shocking for us. And I think just the fact that it was being reported in the literature that it could be something that could be happening without us knowing, I think was that uncertainty that also created more impetus to do this project. And, I think there were some really good case examples that we reviewed of individuals who lost their license, lost their livelihood. They were fired from their position. But also those who lost their lives. And I think that was one of the things we highlighted in this is that removing what risk we could with this project, we wanted to save lives, livelihoods, and licenses. I think removing risk, making it difficult. I think with any drug diversion prevention, creating those safeguards to help prevent those who have not yet abused a drug before, opportunistically. So I think this is just one area of risk, and we can go into that in more detail. But I think it was just one area we found we could make a quick action to make a broad system change.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. We do. Even if we've got a great program surrounding controlled substances, people are going to start to migrate toward the non-controls, right? I mean, because they have a harder time getting their hands on controls. And so if we get propofol locked down and figured out, the next one's going to come out. We're going to have to do the same thing. And it's not just the controlled substances. It's anything that has that can be abused and lends itself toward that. All right. So let's get into, yeah.
I think
Let's get in. Go
just
ahead.
to add on to that, access equals risk. And so, just as you said, easy access means risk. And I do think that some of the points that Mike just highlighted are what made it easy for us to promote this project to the staff nurses, the end users. When we said, here's why we're doing this, it was really easy to gain buy-in when they said, we're trying to protect the practice, the professionals, and our patients.
Yes, exactly. And that is what it's all about, most definitely. Let's hear a rundown of your study and the methods that you used.
Well, we began our process. I would say, we did a significant methodological review and looking in the literature. But we also had, like Dale mentioned, we had a colleague, Dr. Danelle Snyder, who had helped implement this for her graduate project in the anesthesia areas. And so we really, I think, as the start of our project, we had the benefit of meeting with her, learning about her process. And that was formerly in the anesthesia areas, but not in intensive care or emergency department, where we were starting to focus our efforts for the project. And from that information, we had such a strong blueprint for the actual mechanics of how the control mechanisms would be put in place, how staff would be trained, how to present the why or the rationale of why people should change their behavior with disposal practices. So I think that was incredibly helpful for us to have someone who had implemented this successfully. She was published. I just think that was tremendous. And then secondly, we had the benefit, Dale and I worked together in coordination with pharmacy. And pharmacy is incredibly helpful for us in looking at data. And just in our institution, what is the highest, in an intensive care unit setting, what's the highest area of use for Propofol? And not surprisingly, the cardiovascular surgical ICU was the highest area, along with the medical ICU was close behind. So we looked at an area to pilot or to trial this process. So I think we had the process down, again, from our colleague who had already implemented this at our institution successfully. So we had that blueprint. And then we were able to use data from our pharmacy team. It was a tremendous help. So we knew where we were going to implement. Our pilot would be in the area of highest use, where we can make the greatest impact. Dale, would you?
Great.
Yeah, no, I think great point, Mike, about our pharmacy colleagues and how collaborative they were. And I would say just in general, we had multidisciplinary support for this project from the get-go, from our critical care providers, nursing leadership, pharmacy. We had just a lot of support to move forward with this project with very little pushback at all.
Excellent. I think you said it was Danielle that did the study, the one in the OR. And after her study that she did and her paper that she published, did they continue to dispose of it as recommended in those areas? Okay. All right. That's great to see that lasting change that's valuable. Okay. So did you encounter any challenges with performing the study the way, you went in with some, this is what we want to do. We want to implement this. Did you encounter any challenges with it along the way? You had the support, you had some background, it's already been done in the OR.
Dale, is it okay if I go first?
Absolutely.
Thanks. I think uniquely at the beginning, I think one of the challenges was understanding how are we going to audit to see how it's currently being done. So I think we had to get through that barrier of, the intensive care unit that had many beds. How do we understand the flow of Propofol through the intensive care unit after it's used, after it's being disposed? And Thankfully, we had incredible colleagues in the unit itself who were able to collect data for us, and we had a tool that we used to collect the data. There were multiple bins that the propofol could be disposed in, so we had to look in multiple areas of each room and around the unit, and actually make sure all of those areas were audited every day. And so that was an important part of the project. And also, going into a used where there's medication or hazardous materials, and we had to be very safe, in our approach to that data collection. So once we had a really good audit process in place and we have that data, we were able to move forward with education for the staff. We made flyers. We had a learning module created and assigned. We were able to go to a professional development day for those intensive care unit staff and present this. And there were 4 sessions that we presented at. And I think those are all very successful elements from an educational standpoint. And then, speaking about barriers, we went to install a bin, which is some images that are in the paper, a bin that was going to be installed in each workstation where the nurse was working. And for the pilot, we installed those bins with the carbon pouch, the Deterra pouch that was in there, with a tool that could remove the cap of the propofol bottle. And we, again, used this blueprint from Danelle's work, but it had a cable that connected the tool to the bin, so the cap removal tool wouldn't go missing. So we had all those things in place, and we were able to teach the staff at the bedside as well at that time, when we were installing it, and say, where's a good place in the room should we put this, within your workflow. We wanted to make it easy for them to do the right thing. And Dale and I would always talk about that. We wanted to make it easy. We didn't want it to be difficult, because current practice prior to that was putting it down the sink or just putting the bottle right in the waste bin. That was easier at the time. So then the biggest barrier we encountered when staff started putting propofol in the carbon pouches, this is the first day or 2 of go live, those bins started dropping off of the workstations because they were fixed with adhesive, and the bins themselves started falling. And so that was the largest barrier we encountered, was all of a sudden this work we had done, the weight of the propofol as 3 bottles were put in there got heavy, and it made it fall. So it made quite a splash, which maybe brought more awareness to the staff of it. But so it was a unique opportunity for us to say that this is okay. We can go through, we can find stronger adhesive and reinstall all the bins. And there were a lot of them. So it was definitely a collaboration with our support services team, helped us get the type of adhesive that would work. So we reinstalled the bins, and it was a unique opportunity to see a whole another group of staff. And when we installed them the second time, we were able to one-on-one explain the purpose of the project, the purpose of it, how to do it, engage them with a good place to put it in the room. And so I think that was, interestingly, with a staff which is very large in some intensive care units, it's hard to reach everybody. And so this created an opportunity to teach more people. It also helped us to respond to a bigger ear or something challenging. And we were doing a pilot, so we didn't, think to attach them more, with screws or with a better product. So we were doing a temporary solution. So it was a learning experience. At the time, it was terrifying, when they were falling off, and then they're going missing. So, we found out some rooms didn't have them anymore. So they'd fall off, and then they were missing, or
just like
they're being put in different places in the room. And so, but within several days, we went through and we replaced all of them, and we were back on track. But I would say that was the biggest hiccup that we had. But from a other barrier standpoint, staff really got it. From the survey, we did a survey pre and post. They really understood the purpose. They bought into the why. And so I think and they also enjoyed using the bottle cap removal tool to remove those caps. Yeah. So Dale, from your perspective, did you see any other barriers as we moved along through the project?
No, I'll just dovetail on a couple of your comments, Mike. We talked a lot about how we make it easy for people to do the right thing. And we really tried not to add any non-value added steps into the process. And we really went over that and back to that multiple times. I fully agree the staff got the why and left comments about, this is better for the environment, or I want to protect my colleagues or any downstream staff that might have access to these drugs. And so that was really rewarding to see.
Yeah, I love all of this. You said quite a few things in there. I think it's great, number one, that it lined up with their professional development day. Maybe that was an accident or you got lucky. But I think that's a fantastic time. It's additional education, right? You can do the huddles, you can do the education, but to actually make it part of that day, I think that's fantastic. I also love the trying to make it work within their workflow. As nurses, you totally got that. I'm not going to do this if it's not going to work in my workflow. I can, but then I'm not going to do it because it doesn't work. So I think that's great that you worked within that, and that, even to the point of the cap opener, right? That's a ridiculous bottle to try to take a cap off instead of doing a syringe and a plunge and all kinds of stuff. You thought more outside of the box, and then you anticipated it disappearing. So then you stuck it with a cable so that it can't disappear. So you really did think through a lot of those. This is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next. And probably because, it's two nurses that are doing the study. A pharmacist might not have thought about it. So I think that's great. All right. So before it was going down the sink or in the waistband, just in the bottle itself, now you've got it going in the carbon pouches. So you've got a device in the room, in every room, that has the bottle opener and the carbon pouch. So let's talk about that. And I'm sure you have information on the whole OR thing too, because this is what I hear a lot of when people push back on propofol being wasted like this, is that it can't sit in a waste receptacle. It gathers mold. It doesn't shake in. It just settles on the top. And so these are all of our barriers that keep us from wasting propofol in some other manner. So talk me through that.
If I'll take that one, Mike.
Yeah, maybe I need to start calling on each of you.
Yeah, no, because one of the things that we saw in our previous practice was that, when the propofol was discontinued, pulled down from the pole, tubing removed, full bottle placed in the glass recycling receptacle, whether it was half full, 3/4 full, 90% full. And again, it could sit in that receptacle until that receptacle gets to a certain level of fullness until it's emptied. So it could sit there available for anyone to take for, an extended period of time. And that's what gave me a lot of pause and really impetus of, really need to change this practice.
Yeah.
That propofol bottle cap is so hard to remove. It doesn't flow well when you're trying to, have it drip to empty, and the tool. There's something just incredibly satisfying about using the tool, popping the cap, pouring it into the pouch, and you're done just like that. Having the cables secure the tool so that the tool doesn't disappear was imperative. We just from them, when we didn't have that strong enough adhesive, those things would disappear from the room in no time, because there's a lot of other people involved in cleaning rooms or organizing rooms that, didn't get the education on what this project's all about. So there's other players that, we had to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
And the, Dale mentioned, the length of time that the full bottles were in those bins. And the same thing, that length of time, I think, even at a busy unit, it takes a while for the bin maybe to fill and be emptied. And the same thing goes for the actual carbon pouch or the bin in which we were pouring the propofol for this project. And we did get feedback initially, questions about could a pouch be reused between patients, number one. So because we had one of the stations in every room, so it was really easy. So the nurse didn't have to go out of the room. Maybe they were in isolation, and it just made a very big barrier for them to have to do it. So having it in each room, the pouch just made sense. And we did get support as long as we wiped down the pouch, the bin, the tool, in between patients, as long as there was a regular surface level clean, that it was deemed to be safe practice. And so, but probably 2 or 3 bottles, and then that pouch was full. So that was one of the benefits of the smaller pouch, was we would discard it, and it was just discarded right in the regular garbage. And so then that particular product, we felt never had them mold or smell or anything. What we did for some work areas, so once we ended up replicating this to the other intensive care units beyond the cardiovascular surgical ICU, some of those areas use propofol maybe very sparingly or a lot less than some of the other surgical areas, for example. And so those areas we looked at very holistically and also tailored the approach to what they thought. So that shared decision making. So they were able to have input in maybe a kind of a bucket style unit centrally located would be appropriate for their practice. And so some areas chose to do that, and other areas chose to do the bedside bins.
Okay.
In the cardiovascular surgical ICU, one of the things we did was we were able to stock those pouches so that the supply was always being replenished at the unit level. So that was a benefit of that. And that was something the teams, when they'd restock the rooms, they just make sure that those extra pouches were available to replace. So when they got full. Now with the bins or the large, almost a bucket, it was, I believe, 3.5 gallons. So the one we piloted, it could be around for a long time. It could be over 6 months to a year before it would be full.
Mm.
And so initially we had some concerns of things floating on the top, or maybe a smell, or maybe concerns for mold. And so we worked very closely with the manufacturer, and we just determined that for those situations, for those areas that don't use it a lot, that you might have it for a long time before you replace it. Once you see any of those concerning things, we just have them replace it. And that might be 3 months in, 6 months in. But then the question did come up, how do you know when it's full? How do you know when it's full? So for the smaller pouches, it was pretty easy to tell. You just had to be able to close or zip that bag up again. But for the larger bins, it was a little bit harder. And we did want to understand from the manufacturing standpoint as well, depending on how much activated carbon the product that was in there that would bind to the drug to deactivate it. We wanted to understand. We wanted to understand how much propofol could be put in there before it would be more than the carbon product could deactivate. And so those questions started to come up for us, and we had a lot of conversation around that because we wanted to understand that and make sure that we weren't overfilling the bin either, and that bin to become a risk point where people would try to access that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Two questions, same question, I guess, but for one for the pouch and one for the bin. So the pouch would hold about 3 bottles worth. Did they have to do any agitation to it? Did they seal it when they were finished and then open it? Yes. Okay.
That's a
So
great question.
did not have to agitate if I read
No,
your
because it
okay.
was liquid, because of propofol being liquid, you didn't
Okay.
have to agitate it. It would quickly
Okay.
bind.
Okay.
For the bucket or the larger one, depending on, later on we added additional controlled substances and things that were tablets or patches,
Okay.
films. And so that required a different procedure. But when we were just doing propofol at the beginning, we didn't have to add water. We didn't have to agitate it or do anything else.
Okay. All right. And then the pouches, did they seal it each time after they used it? Yes. Okay. So no agitation, seal it. They go back in, open it. The nurse can tell because they can see the level and how close it's getting to sealing it. And you said you kept a supply readily available. Did the nurses change those out?
It was the nurse's responsibility ultimately when they put that third bottle in, and it depends on how much is being used for each patient. But once they determined that it was full, that you couldn't really fit more in there, we wanted to be able to close and seal, so it wouldn't leak in the garbage. But at that
Sure.
point, they would put it in the garbage, and it was their responsibility to replace it, to get a fresh propofol disposal bag. And that could be something they delegated to someone else on the unit. We also had it being stocked. It was something on some units that some ancillary team members would help, who were doing stocking. They could help check that as one of their checklist items for the unit.
Okay. All right. Did you keep that in a supply cabinet station or just in a drawer? Okay.
Yeah, it was in the
Yes, in
central
a-
supply area.
Okay. All right. So back to the larger bucket and the odor and the concern for mold. I mean, I guess depending on if you have it low enough that people could see in there. Some of us short people, right, can't really see in there. Did they find any of those issues and then modify? I think you said at first you thought they could leave it for 6 months and then it became 3 months. What was the overall sentiment of that? In other words, those concerns that other people have, do they seem to be legitimate concerns? And so then you just gotta modify your duration?
Dale, I could take a crack at this. I know from the beginning, we had a lot of great feedback from individual units as they were trying to understand just the workflow for their work area, as well as what is considered normal. What they see in that bucket or the pouch. So we did do some education with nursing leadership and also staff directly. I would say, a lot of learning was done, for those areas with the bucket style, the larger, over 3 gallon. At first, areas were putting it on the ground. So like you mentioned, you want to be the right height to be able to see in there, but because of the carbon, it was so dark. And so it was hard to see. You look into the hole and it was difficult to see how much was in there actually, for in that early time. And also we learned we need to have the bucket off the ground, from an infection prevention standpoint. So I think we learned some great things early on. And, given that you couldn't see in there very well, some people would use their pen light to look in there to see how full it was. So as we transitioned to the next phase, we did get a lot of feedback that it would be helpful to be able to see better, to see what's in there. And, those areas that did explain there's something floating on the top of this. I'm concerned about it. It could be mold. We did have some of those evaluated.
Okay.
Oftentimes it didn't come back as mold, but it just didn't, it didn't look pleasant when you've been disposing things in there for months, over time. It just, so I think those areas we recommended them to change the bucket, once it got to that point, whether there was a smell or a film. And that was the manufacturer recommendation as well.
Okay. All right. So the pouches in the rooms were specifically for propofol only, and they were able to seal them shut and just throw them in the regular trash because You've got activated carbon. You do not have a controlled substance. It went into the trash. The buckets they could use for propofol and controlled substances. So then I'm sure those were disposed of differently. Those weren't thrown in the trash at that point, right?
Yeah, correct. That was a later iteration. So after our project had ended, there was opportunities for engagement just in that process. And again, with the controlled substances, the goal ultimately, with even propofol, I think prior, all controlled substance waste, including and non-controlled substances like propofol, were being disposed of down the sink, which was determined to be the lowest risk place to dispose of it. So we were putting everything down the sink. And as a nurse for many years, you always question that, but that there wasn't really another option. So this was amazing, first starting with propofol and then adding tablets, liquid controlled substances, films, and patches. So all these other things could go in this product. And so that was something that over time, the goal was to not have anything go down the sink. So the things that we traditionally put down the sink would all go into this other solution.
Right. And then you had just, I'm guessing, a separate RCRA type of a container for the things that had to go in there.
Yes. And because of the deactivation, the product fully deactivated them. Basically, those buckets or the larger containers couldn't be just disposed because they were heavy. And so they were incinerated. So we worked closely with our waste management, hazardous recycling, and waste colleagues, and they helped us with that process. But those were incinerated ultimately. But it was something that took months to fill. And so when it was full, we had a process where we would alert our team who could come pick up the bucket from the unit. So we keep it in our sealed utility area until it was picked up, and they would actually bring it and waste it for us because it was very heavy. It could be 40 pounds, and we wouldn't want that to be dropping down through the garbage chute.
Yeah. Wow. I'm curious. I know your focus of the study was just on waste and how to waste it. Did you incorporate any other pieces of handling it like a controlled substance? In other words, storage with blind count and, only stored with propofol? Were nurses supposed to record their waste in the automated dispensing machine, in the chart with a witness, that kind of thing? Was any of that done along with it, or that's completely separate?
And that was completely separate. We didn't incorporate any of those into it.
Okay.
And I think that raises a good point, because there are many ways to divert medications, and this is addressing one point. But hopefully it was decreasing the risk downstream as well. And so we really tried to stay focused to the scope of the project and keep it on, the narrow.
Right. No, that makes sense. Because you did so much education surrounding this about propofol, I'm curious, did you see any reduction of waste quantity at all?
I think that we did explore that from a weight perspective, that this would decrease, technically it would decrease the waste weight in the recycling, where these bottles were being placed in the recycling bins, but then you were adding it into another container that was also being wasted, perhaps by weight. So we determined that there was no impact on the project itself from a cost or a savings from that perspective, based on our waste streams.
Okay.
So. Yeah, but it was something we explored because we thought maybe that could be a cost reduction.
Right.
I almost forgot that we went down the rabbit hole of how much it costs to get rid of waste in all of the different containers. Here's what it is for the garbage. Here's what it is for the glass. Here's what it is for.
Yeah. So it kind of evened out. Yeah. Did you find nurses were more mindful of, I mean, if the patient needs it, they need it. But sometimes I feel like a new bottle comes out and barely anything is given and then it's wasted. It's like, did you not know ahead of time it's going to be DC'd? Did you find that they were more mindful in any way about when to open a new bottle and start it, or those numbers, or maybe you didn't even look at that?
We didn't look at that in particular, but
Okay.
we did. I think anecdotally, we would think that would have had an impact, just that they'd be more focused on um, when to discontinue the propofol, because it's something that
Mhm.
is being uh, yeah, thoughtfully pursued.
Right.
But in the literature, it did show there is variance in a lack of standardization. So they were offering 50 milliliter bottles, 100 ml bottles. There's different sizes. And so that's one thing we did explore with our pharmacy colleagues regarding, is that something that Mayo is interested in looking at standardization of the size of bottle so that
Mhm.
there'd be less waste. And so what we did find was the bottle sizes they were using they already were factoring that in. They were already standardizing and streamlining it, but they also needed a couple different sizes.
Mhm.
So it was an interesting thing in the literature, um, lack of standardization. And then you mentioned, the other control mechanisms, or I think in the literature it said it very clearly, but just the high volume of propofol usage in the various areas that it is, storage, the preparation, just I think what we found was that it would be extremely challenging because of the high volume use to control it. And that's why it had failed to be a controlled substance at the time of our work, but also beyond that, because it would be very challenging to find mechanisms to lock large volumes down in between all those various stages as it goes through the.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that is. And in terms of the different sizes, I think there's a lot you can do from an IT order perspective on those sizes, right? If a unit has two different sizes in stock, you obviously want them to select the most appropriate. Sometimes that smaller vial is perfect. Other times it's not. It has to be the 100s. And so you're dependent on the person removing to make that decision unless you lock it down from an IT perspective. This type of order, this is the only thing that the pocket is going to open for you to get to. You can't get to the bigger one. You always want to hardwire those things if you can, for sure.
And we found, I just wanted to piggyback on that we found a lot of patients, they were trying to remove sedation sooner after surgery. And so we found that they might come out to the ICU and have the propofol discontinued within 15 minutes. I mean, they were moving quickly. And so we might have very full bottles that we found in our audits. And they might have been 100 milliliter bottles. So, there's quite a bit of propofol in there. So it was very interesting. And we're so excited. I think, especially Dale and I were excited that staff found, in our results, pre-intervention, 44% of our bottles were found to be full of propofol. And we just kind of concluded that was over about 5 mils or higher, left in the bottles. So just noticeable amount or more. And then after the intervention, it went down to 0%. So it was just it was a profound change. And one of the things we studied as well, we captured the data on the number of bottles with the caps removed, because that would show that the bottle cap tool is being used. And so 90% of the bottles post-intervention, the cap was removed, 90% of the bottles. The 10% that didn't have the caps removed were empty already. So they didn't. So it was just really interesting, to see that. But I think that was a very good indicator that the change was successful. And then we did another data point weeks later, and it was the same result.
Excellent.
And then, looking at down the road and with sustainability, now that's been over 5 years ago,
Yeah.
We're still seeing it being done. And as with any change, as you add a lot of new staff, or you have new people, it's having that training and that enculturation of the why. Like, why are we doing this? So I think that's something that is very important to us to keep that message going.
Excellent. Yeah. So you maintained it, and is it now used throughout your facility in all Propofol? And this is what's happening. Are there any plans for, and maybe you already have, of rolling it out across the entire organization?
We shared our results. We shared it across sites, and with all of our nursing colleagues, and through our drug diversion groups as well. And so, we really encourage them and trying to lay out not only the paper, but our instructions as to step by step. Here's what we did if you want to replicate it, which we're highly recommending.
Right. Yeah. Between the two studies at your place, you've really made it very easy for them to take it and do it. I say very easy. I mean, they know what to do. It's just getting everyone to do it. All right. Well, this is great. This is good information. I think it's encouraging information for those that feel that they cannot waste Propofol handle it more like a controlled substance, because you could easily add on the other pieces of it. You're right. Storage is a problem because it is hard to store as a controlled substance, but certainly that extra witness and combining it when it comes to waste and then putting it in a secure pouch that renders it unusable instead of dropping the entire bottle. It's something that everybody can do. And it's been laid out here pretty nicely, exactly how to do it. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel on that. Although, did you guys, the bottle opener, that's your thing?
We were fortunate to work with a machine shop that, created the tool for us. And that's why it was important to secure the tool so that they didn't disappear or end up in the garbage. And so that is where I think smaller institutions, it might not be as easy to replicate making that tool. I think it has potential as a project for someone to, market the tool.
Yeah, there you go. All right. That's going to be somebody's takeaway out there.
Exactly.
In fact, maybe I'll leave that part off and we can take that away. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I really appreciated it. And I think the listeners will find a lot of value from this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.